Cache-maniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
We're back with GeoGearHeads episode 144 to talk about GSAK, the Windows-based tool for geocachers. For the Bad Cop, Figures, and myself, Daryl W4, we're thrilled you're joining us, either live or recorded, to learn more about that iconic tool.
You know, Daryl, I really like numbers, and 144, that's 12 times 12, or in other terms, it's gross. So this is our gross episode. We have Cache at Night joining us as our sponsor again. For the last for a little while, thanks to our patrons. Thank you to those monthly donations, because they've topped the $110 mark. That means this will be the last sponsored show. So thanks again for our patrons for helping us get over that threshold where we are able to bring you shows without commercial support.
Of course, Cache at Night has a wide selection of night caching, hence the name, night caching supplies. And they are the first place I go looking for those night caching supplies. There's much more, though. For those of you traveling, check out the AA emergency charger. It uses 4 AA batteries to charge devices like mobile phones through USB. You can carry it in just about anything just in case, and because it's AA batteries, you can pull those batteries out for use in the GPSR if you need to power there. For myself, I toss a set of the lithium AA's in, so it has a shelf life of about a decade. Then I can always charge up whatever I need to charge up in an emergency off those AA's. Just, I leave it in my glove compartment most of the time just to make sure that I have it. So head over to our show notes for the banner linking to the AA emergency charger, or just hit cacheatnight.com to check out that and much more. Thanks again to Cache at Night for their support of the GeoGearHeads.
Daryl, you're a wise man to always carry extra battery power. That's one of my go-to things, extra battery power. So on this show, we're welcoming back Figures, or as he may be known in the real world, Adrian Faulkner. Now, he joined us last for GeoGearHeads Beta 35. We titled that one, Why Use GSAK? So, welcome back, Adrian.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be back. You can find my articles on a lot of things, including GSAK, at GPS Tracklog.
Very nice. Now, last week we talked to you through email, last week we asked you, the listeners, via email to tell us what platforms you use when connecting with geocaching.com. We've received emails from just 29 of you. But receive that code to project-gc.com. Adrian, who was drawn as the winner for this week?
This week the winner is Geo_Cacher, that's with a K, and I'm told that the code has already been emailed.
It has, but here's the results of that quick survey of the GeoGearHeads. And we started with the mobile platforms, because more and more it seems like that's what people are doing. And iOS is still in the lead at 55%. Android has 41%. And we actually had one person, which makes 3%, on a BlackBerry. But more importantly for tonight's discussion was the conversation about Mac versus Windows. And Windows still has the lead by 66% of the people responding. And this is, total of the respondents, not, percentages of total respondents for each platform. Because in most cases, most people are using more than one. And it was really surprising how many people were using both iOS and Android for their caching. A lot of the times they are on iPads. They actually went so far as to share that with us, and have Android phones. And other times it went quite the opposite. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here, because I do want to get back to that. But Windows users made up the 66%, and Mac users are 33%. So if you do the math, not everyone is even on a desktop anymore, and more I'm running into people who are on the Mac And like Team Pugach said here in the live Q&A, he's not really going to use the Mac or the GSAK too much because it is not a native Mac app, but there are ways that you can run GSAK on a Mac.
Well, of course there is, but I'm interested, and it's just because, it's the nature of my job and who I am, interested in those who have abandoned the desktop altogether and only using mobile platforms, such as a phone or a tablet, to access everything they need. I think that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've been noticing more and more, and even from last year's survey, these numbers have really changed. But this is a much smaller sample than that big survey we did last year, and of course we are going to try to do another survey. But the thing that I really think from looking at the responses this week is a lot of the people who have iOS for their phone and Android for their tablet, it looked like they were specifically going for either the cheap 7-inch tablet or just the 7-inch tablet before Apple had the Mini. So I'm wondering if we're going to see even bigger changes in the near future as that starts to happen, as people start getting into the new iPads. And I wonder if we're going to see some of those people who had the Android phones that had the iPad start moving away from the iPads into Android tablets now that Android has become so much better on the tablet side.
That's a good question, Daryl. On tablets, I actually do tend to lean a little more towards Android than iOS. But you know what? It's interesting that people are using both, because literally, if you're going to use, say, the geocaching app, you have to buy it twice, once for iOS, once for Android. So I find that interesting, that people are willing to go spend money on each platform to get the tools that they need to go out and find the caches.
And of course, the tools are developing for the non-Windows-based systems, and the one that we just gave away the code for, project-gc.com, is a great one to do much of what GSAK does for people, much of what they really want, but it's nowhere near the capabilities that GSAK has. So, it's one of those things for, we'll say 98%, just making up some weird numbers. For 98% of the people, it's going to do 99% of what they'd want from GSAK, but it probably doesn't even have 40% of GSAK's capabilities available right now in Project-GC. On the other hand, Project-GC can do some stuff that you can't get yet in GSAK.
One of the things I was just going to say, one of the things I find with Project GC is that I think it's a better tool for comparing what you've done with other caches, whereas I think that GSAK is more a tool for manipulating your own data.
Yeah, I was just going to go there, and that's an excellent point, thank you, is that because it is one big online database, essentially, it's able to do some of that comparison that you can't really do as quickly and as easily through GSAK on your machine, because it's gathering all this data from everyone, and it can keep it all in one spot, and you'd have to go and grab that and download it, because it would have to be on your machine if GSAK were going to do that.
Right, and we need to mention that Project-GC is platform agnostic. It's going to work on all these devices we listed, even a BlackBerry.
Absolutely. And Team Pugach in the Q&A just said that he's confident that as cloud-based becomes a more common and stable platform, it will be all platforms one day. And what he means by that is very much what we were just talking about. It will work on Android, on iOS, on Mac, on Windows, on Chrome OS. And we did actually have one user who's using Chrome OS as his caching device. Not necessarily in the field, but to actually get the pocket queries and everything else. And it's entirely possible with Chrome OS to create your pocket queries right on gc.com, download them to the unit, to your GPSR, if that's what you're looking for. You can do all kinds of stuff with things like Google Drive, with Dropbox. So Chrome OS is even a good operating system if you're looking to go for that connected OS and use something like Project-GC.
Yep, exactly. I think actually it'd be a little better than iOS on a tablet in that case.
It can be. It depends on what you're looking for. 'Cause, iOS is that it is built to be out in the field doing stuff. So if you're looking for it as that field mapping system, it's going to be doing a better job in part because you usually have the GPS built in. And I don't think I've seen any of the Chromebooks yet that have a GPS. I could be wrong, but I don't think I've seen one. And if that's what you're looking for, is like trying to figure out the next cache you're going to, it's not going to do quite as well, and it relies on that data connectivity that most of the iOS devices, they're going to require it to some extent, but it will do the caching, and most of the stuff on Chrome OS right now is still really reliant on having a data connection all the time.
That's true. That's true. And in the field, that can be challenging unless you have a phone that can be a hotspot or you have another hotspot device. But there are Chromebooks with built-in LTE, so that's always an option. But we're here to talk about GSAK tonight.
We are, and we actually have a very good question in the chat room, in the live Q&A from Limax that's going to kick off the discussions tonight. So he asked, I'm looking for a good tutorial on the macro language for GSAK. I have been unsuccessful so far. I'd like suggestions on what would be a good approach to learning the language.
Well, one of the things I would recommend, I've not actually written any macros myself, but I have sort of looked into sort of what goes into it. And the one thing that really surprised me was that if you go to the GSAK.net forums, there are a lot of code snippets there. So they will kind of, the community there is very keen to kind of share bits of code that you can reuse and reutilize. So what I would suggest is, one, have a look at that, but also because you can kind of look at the source code for some of the macros, is like you would learn any programming language, sort of take it to bits, kind of change one value and see what happens. And that's I remember when I first learned HTML, I would kind of view the source code and kind of go, well, what happens if I change this code for something slightly different? What happens? What breaks? And that. So I would say that that's probably your first best bet to sort of start getting involved. And then if you have any sort of queries, I think that community would probably be the best place to sort of start asking questions.
Oh, the forums for GSAK are absolutely incredible, not only with the macros they provide, but with the help that the users are willing to throw in to help you to get the exact data that you're looking for back out of GSAK and your own caching details.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes a matter of pride because GSAK is so versatile. I think that when somebody finds something unique or very clever to do with it, they're really keen to share it. So when you sort of you're there and you're going, wow, I'd love to be able to cache or get this sort of stat out or be able to plan my caching this way or that way. You do find that a lot of GSAK users will kind of sort of jump out the woodwork and go, oh, you can do it with GSAK by doing this and this and this. And there's some really innovative ideas of ways to kind of use the tool to kind of help you, just basically, maximize your caching.
Very nice. Now, when you say maximize your caching, what are some of the things that you're talking about? What are some of the things that you get out of GSAK?
One is speed. Because I'm terrible. I know people say it's not about the numbers, and don't get me wrong, there are days when I like nothing more than a 6-point multi, but I do like my numbers. I'm sorry, I'm really guilty of that. So what I try and do is what I want GSAK to do is to do all the administrative tasks that happen before and after as quickly as possible. One of the things that I've found recently to do is to use GSAK to plan my day's caching. Now, here in the UK, it's a little bit different from when I've sort of cached in the US. You tend to have power trails, so it will start at location A and end in location B. Here in the UK and throughout Europe, you tend to get like circular walks. So they will start at one place and go round and end at the same place. However, the kind of the idea is pretty much the same. Is that what you want to do is, if you're doing a power trail and there is a cache down a side road for zero point 0.1 of a mile away, you kind of want to pick that up along the way because you're going quite close by it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I found what you could do was actually use GSAK to populate some of the user data fields. So you could then kind of give that a number from sort of, I number them 0, 1, so I plan out my route. I'll look at like the trail maps and I'll look at the road network and work out the order and number them in the user data. And then I'll export that, but alter the name so that that number appears before the caches. So literally, if we were all there as a group, instead of going, oh, I'm locked onto the next nearest and start walking in one opposite direction that you're going in, everybody's got all the numbers there, and they can basically see which cache that we're going to next. So, and it's little tricks like that when you're having a big day, when you're wanting to do 150, 200 caches on foot in a day, you just don't want to lose any time. And standing around having a conversation about which cache we're heading towards next just can lose you a lot of time.
And it's so much easier to say, hey, we're going to go to cache 5 instead of GC ABC 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
and
or
you have to look and go, wait,
or
which
I see
one is
dead
that?
people when there's 5
exactly.
cemeteries around.
Right. So I completely agree with you. In fact, when I was using GSAK early on, I did things very much like that. I would export the difficulty and terrain into the title, so I could show it on my GPS and know, oh, okay, so I'm going after this one. I better grab some boots out of the car before I leave.
And this is actually something that you wrote an article on earlier in the year. So if people want some visuals and to go back and get some more information, we'll have that link in the show notes as well.
Exactly. Now, to start off this show, we talked about different operating systems, different ways to use the information from geocaching.com. And one of the things is that GSAK is a Windows-only program. However, there are options to run GSAK on a Mac. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few you can sort of emulate it, I believe. If you I'm trying to remember what the Mac. I've got Mac.
Parallels.
Sorry, say again.
Parallels.
Yeah, that's it. I've heard that you can run it with Parallels, but I've heard some people. It's one of those things. Some people have said that they've got on okay with it, and other people have said that they've had issues with it. When I recently, back in around Easter, I went to the States myself, and I needed GSAK on a Mac. And what I did in the end for myself was I used another program that's kind of a GSAK clone. It's called iCaching, and it does a lot of the same things. So for me, I'd kind of, rather than trying to run Parallels and that, I actually used a different software product. It was a bit expensive, but I think it was about $20, but seeing as I needed that sort of functionality, that's the choice I made with that.
Well, the best way to do GSAK on a Mac for compatibility reasons is to actually run Boot Camp with actually restarting, firing up your Mac as if it's Windows, using Windows. So you're talking, out of pocket. Boot Camp is free, but you still have to buy a Windows license, which we'll say is about $100.
Yeah.
There's some cheaper methods, there's some more expensive methods, but figure about $100. So that's the most compatible way. The problem that I've heard with running in apps like Parallels, VMware, and VirtualBox is more often than not the USB doesn't work. So sometimes it will work if you're loading the GPS, sometimes it won't. So as long as you don't want to run the GPS loading right from within your virtual machine, then I would say just run Parallels or VMware or whatever. Now the other option that's a little bit more interesting is Crossover, which is essentially Wine, but which is an emulator. It doesn't require Windows at all. And that's one of the other things is whenever you get into these parallel or into these virtual machines, you're going to have to buy Windows again anyway. Plus, you have to buy the VM, the virtual machine on top of that. But Crossover eliminates Windows completely, and compatibility seems to be very flexible as to whether it's going to work with any given version of GSAK. So I would recommend against running Crossover, but it is an awesome idea, and I kind of hope that someday it does work.
Now, in the Q&A, we have Team Pugach who says Parallels is amazing because you don't have to boot out of OS X in this case, and it runs in a window. So
yeah, and you don't even have to run in a window either. Parallels and VMware both will let you actually run in cohesion mode, so it works basically like it's a Mac app.
Yeah. Now, for VMware, I know you can map over a USB port, and it's rock solid on VM. So I'll give you that.
Well, it does work on the VMware or the VM sides. It does work most of the time, but there's some things that breaks every couple of releases, is my understanding, in the mapping and dealing with it through a VM. And I'm told that that's not a Mac thing. It's a VM thing with the way that GSAK is coded. It's true if you're running a VM on a Windows box and just sandboxing your machine that you're running GSAK on, and there's reasons to do that we should probably actually talk about a little bit. And then it will happen the same thing on like Linux. So it's not something particularly good.
A lot of the time, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of sometimes if you get more and more on your software stack, there's more and more chance of something having a funny 5 minutes and
exactly.
kind of breaking.
Yeah, and Limax is saying that he's going to have to look at this stuff a little bit more if he's able to get a MacBook Pro. He's been coveting one for over a year. And Team Pugach is actually saying that he has not found that GPS... well, here, let me read exactly. I have found GPSRs don't work well with Mac in general. I used to use Magellan, and if I tried to add the files to the GPSR, it would take 2 or 3 of the 30 plus, despite them being on the GPSR when I looked at it like a flash drive. But the device doesn't see it. Oh, but basically, it sounds like he's getting truncated files, which is not a problem of the Mac so much. You'll find that kind of problem will happen frequently on some of these earlier firmware releases, where it's a bad character in the GPX file that just stops processing. And that was a big issue I had with the Garmin units for a long time, but they would fix it and then they would come back and release several down the road.
I mean, I was using my Garmin with my MacBook Air when I was in the States, and I was kind of retrieving PQs and kind of loading them up, and I was, touch wood, I didn't have any, I didn't have any issues, so I was quite pleased, because that was one of the things I was really worried about was connecting my, making sure I had, a reliable way of uploading, PQs to the GPS.
Yes, and I have found there are GSAK macros to help clean up those titles, remove any questionable characters, and replace it with something else. So
and that's exactly what I was just going to get into, is really the fix for some of that kind of stuff is to actually run it through some kind of external processor that will clean up some of those weird characters. Like, in my case, I actually just use the Geosphere, import it and export it right back out, and that fixes just about every problem I've ever run into. GSAK will actually create some problems. If you just do the export to GPX, you have to target like a Oregon 450 or something in order to make it actually, strip out some of the bad characters. And that's what you're looking for. But Team Pugach also had said in the live Q&A he'd have to drag the folder off the GPS onto the desktop and then back onto the GPSR to make it recognize the files. So that seems like it's a file system issue that he was actually running into.
Yeah, I wonder if it's actually, or if it's writing the file and not reporting back properly. Something,
Yeah.
and it could be the format of the, I want to say, of the GPSR's memory. Perhaps it's not, the Mac isn't reading it properly.
Those Magellans are actually built on Windows CE.
Right.
So they're not exceptionally great at file management, but I'm wondering if what he's running into is the invisible files that the Mac tends to write. And I do know that some Windows machines have issues when they see those files as well. So that could just be something that there's a few tools on the Mac. We don't want to get into that in this show, but there's a few tools on the Mac that will let you actually disable writing those files to certain devices. So that might be the fix to fix that problem.
Well, Adrian, getting back to GSAK, the one thing I'm hearing over and over again from fellow GeoGearHeads is that they're using GSAK to log their caches on geocaching.com. Now, I personally don't do that, so will you walk me through the process of why I should start doing that? And what
okay. The moment that I found out that you could log caches with GSAK, I'd always done it, and it had always been quite a laborious process. But basically, with the version 8, you basically have something called geocaching.com access, which is basically it's where GSAK interfaces with geocaching.com's API, and it can do lots of funky things. But one of the best things is that it can log all your caches for you. So what you basically do is you'll go out in the field and you'll log your caches on your GPS like you normally do. Then when you come back, you go into this feature, and if you could remember, does it anymore? But if you can remember, like a mail merge, where you used to create like a template in Word, and then you'd interface it with your Access database to get your mailings together. Back in the days when people actually did snail mail. It's basically similar to that. So you can create like a template for your log. Now, you can get quite advanced because there's some variables that you can use. So, for example, in my one, I make sure I put the timestamp on there. I put the number find of the number found that day. So if I find like 50 caches that day and it's cache number 3, I will put that in there. And I will also put what find it is overall, as in all my finds. And that's all templated out. And basically, I will create that template. I will then load in from the GPS the finds for that day. I can attach photos to certain logs. I can dip trackables. I can drop trackables off as well. So you do that, and the thing that I tend to do is, because I like it to try and personalize logs a little bit. If you've done a big power trail in a day, there's not really too much variation, unfortunately. So what I try and do is I always keep a note of who found the cache within our team when we go out. So I'll always put a note of who found the cache. So I will manually go in. So whereas before I was actually typing each individual log, and I could be doing 80, 90 logs. What I do is I kind of have a template, and then I just put in the kind of individualized information in, it's found by this person, or this is where we had something funny happened, or some incident happened, and then you just press publish, and it will do the whole lot for you. You can just go off and leave it. And I remember once I did a series when I first started caching, and we did 100 caches in a day, and it took me the best part of 2 days to log it all. And now I can log 120 caches in about 20 minutes, and the logs are probably more detailed than they were back then.
That's really good. I like that idea. So you template it, Now, will that work over multi-day finds? Say I'm gone for a weekend.
Yeah,
Bring
you
them all
can
back
do.
in.
You can do. The only I don't do it, and the reason being is because I like to say how many finds I had in that day. So what you have is the variable you use is the run count.
Hmm.
So if you're multi-day finds, so say you've gone for 4 days and you found 30 caches. If I use that template, it would say it would be number 3 of 30. But I mean, it just depends how you format your logs. The way round that, because when I came out to the States, I basically what I did was when I imported it, I basically went into my GPS and took apart the geocaching visits file
Hmm.
and basically created separate files for each day, so I could, it's just me being a little bit OCD about my logging, but
Well,
even doing that,
more logs.
it was like a day to log literally sort of 4 weeks of caches. So,
Nice. Now, what kind of detail do you put on your GPSR when you've out in the field?
well, okay, I use codes. I have all little abbreviations. So I have the initial of the person. If it's me that found it, I'll put an F. If it's one of the people I regularly cache with, I'll put their initial. Then I have AS, which is after a search, which means that it's taken. I know from that it's taken us quite a while to find. And then, unfortunately, it's a very bad acronym, but it's ASS, which is after a short search. So it means that we found it, but it just took us a little bit of kind of a short time to actually find. We didn't find it straight away. And then I will put in, if there was something where you crossed a field with cows in or something, I'll put some like one-word reminder that will just spark in my memory. Oh, that's the one with the cows, or the, WL wet log and things like that. So as we go on, we kind of develop more acronyms for stuff. So if you're doing this at home and when you're on your GPS, just literally kind of start with the basics. QEF, quick easy find, things like that.
So
Nice.
this is basically all you're putting in on the field notes, and then you're importing those field notes back into GSAK. And I understand that it's actually taking the timestamp off the GPSR
Yes.
and using that. But are you saying that you're actually doing like a replace within GSAK for those notes, or is
No,
it something
I
that you have to go
just
back
type them
later?
because it's a lot easier to, instead of, you're basically typing one line. So what I will tend to do is create my template found by, and there's always one cacher who tends to have a better day than others and finds the most, so I'll put their name as the default. So if it's then, oh, it's not them, it's somebody else, I will literally, as I go through each log, I will just change the name and then just put, right, found by figures after a short search or after a bit of a search, or and so I'm literally writing one or two sentences that are unique to that cache. Now again, we're talking what the type of circuits, the type of caches that I tend to do tend to be big long power trails. So it's not, it tends to have a paragraph about the day, and then kind of a paragraph about the individual cache. So, if I was going and doing just a couple of caches, I may just write something very specific for it. So,
Yeah,
Nice.
that's just the field notes file, so you should be able to do that with most of the paperless GPSRs, and many of the smartphone apps will actually support that, though not the official geocaching app, we should note. That doesn't support the file, it only posts the field notes to
yeah.
geocaching.com.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't tried, because I tend to use on my I've got I think I've got COGO on my work phone, and then I've got the geocaching app on my iPhone, and I haven't actually tried I tend to use those devices for when I'm out and about somewhere and I've suddenly found that, oh, there's a cache here. So they're just the odd one or twos. I've never really used it for a big day out, but I must admit I haven't tried kind of using the smartphone and trying to get the logs off of there and in through GSAK and out the other side. That would be an interesting experiment.
Well, I know a lot of people who do that with Geosphere, which I find kind of ironic because Geosphere does some of that templating themselves. But they just like using GSAK because that's where all of their databases and they keep their finds and everything in anyway.
Yeah.
So they prefer to keep it that way. So they'll put in the notes and they have like the prefix and the postfix of the logs. It's automatically generated. And then if they have something they want to say, they just type it in right in the smartphone.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah. The trouble is I find with the smartphone is that maybe it's just where I'm getting older, but I mean literally when I'm in the field, when I'm going through my user field note, I often look at it, right, okay, there was a letter here that doesn't correspond to any of the caches that were caching with me that day, so I then have to kind of look at the keyboard and find which key I've mispressed based on, right, oh, it's okay, it's G and I wanted F or, something like that.
Yeah, that's one of the areas where I find the voice dictation can help.
Bingo.
But names are always a problem.
Yeah.
Well, with Geosphere, you put the names into the template, and then you can say, I found this after a short find. It was underneath a bush 3 feet away from where, ground zero was. You
could do it in the keyboard shortcuts as well for the whole device, and then it's available anywhere that you'd want to be using it.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So yeah, I use voice dictation a lot. So I talk to myself as I walk away from a cache.
I actually was made fun of not too long ago for doing that.
See, doesn't with the voice dictation, doesn't that need a data connection to work? I thought a lot of those. Yeah, the big problem we have over here is.
But Android it does not.
Okay. I was going to say, because I find over here where we tend to go, we suddenly find we've got no data connection, and that's always the one where, it's the one where you can't find it, and there's a spoiler picture on one of the logs, and you can't view it because obviously on your GPS you haven't imported it. So,
see, and we just talked about that a couple of weeks ago because it's always important to grab that kind of stuff whenever you go out because you never know when you're going to lose that data connection.
Right.
Well. We found here you don't have to go far to lose a data connection. It's a lot better in the US. In places
it probably depends a lot on where. Yeah, this is true, and it's getting better over here at least. I'm finding I actually had signed up for one of the services for a week to try it before I signed a new contract with my current carrier, just to see how it was because I left them because it wasn't working for me. It dropped signal way too often, and so much better than they were 7 years ago when I left them.
Yeah. When I was in the States, there's a pack you can get from Walmart where it gives you like all the 4 networks, all in one. Go as the name of it, anytime or something.
The name of it. Yeah, well, you can't on the same phone usually. But you can run, sometimes you'll have a CDMA-enabled phone that will run the CDMA and the GSM networks, but here in the States, AT&T and T-Mobile can be switched, not at par, but they're roughly compatible.
Okay.
And Verizon is its own network on a CDMA carrier, and same with Sprint, and those two are not interchangeable. Okay. So you usually can't do much with them, but as long as you're GSM, which is one of the reasons I'm on AT&T, you can pop out that card and pop in a new card, a new SIM card, and use it anywhere in the world that has GSM service.
Okay, cool.
Well, we had another question in the live Q&A from Limax. It says, I had a little trouble with dropping trackables when using Visit All in GSAK. If I still appear on all of the finds after that, and I had to go in and remove them manually.
it all you're doing is dipping it, aren't you? It's not actually dropping it off. So I haven't noticed. I must admit I have a trackable that I log into every single cache. So I always have one that is as visit all.
Mm-hmm.
And I've dropped off cache of other travel bugs as part of my logs, and I've never had an issue there.
So maybe it's a terminology thing. So
Well, I
perhaps
think what he's saying is if he's taking a whole bunch of trackables with him all day,
mm-hmm.
and he goes and drops one of those, he's visiting them in at each cache along the way, but if he drops at one, GSAK is still logging that one as visiting all of the caches from there on out.
All of the that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me that makes sense why it's doing it that way. I would say that that's not the correct way to do it, so maybe from see if it isn't on a bug list or if someone has a workaround for it that might help.
Yeah,
Any other suggestions?
As I say, I haven't encountered that one again. And I mean, I suppose the best thing to do is if you can find a step so that you can reproduce it, and then, as I say, if you put it into the forums or the support, they can see if they can reproduce it as well. But as I say, it's not one I've ever encountered, and I move on a lot. So.
All right, and let's move on to another Q&A from Landau351, and he's saying that he uses GSAK to store all sorts of non-geocaching.com stuff, such as waypoints and GCA, geocaching.com.au. I also store lab caches and Munsies there as well.
Yeah, I when I first started, I found maybe a little bit different for sort of waypoints and sort of Munsies, but I having separate databases for like my finds and ones for where I was going to cache for the day. And as I've gone over time, the States, I've started putting everything into the same database. I did try something with Munsies, and there was also a way that you could store trackables. This was actually as a database, and I played around with that, but I didn't really get on with that. So yeah, there's definitely flexibility there. You can create multiple databases for different things if you want. I just find that for me, I find that it's a little bit easier for geocaching stuff, at least, to kind of put it all in one. I think it works a little better that way.
Yeah, but it is nice to be able to store all of that different information in there if you'd like. Now, I think we're going to have to cut this short because for some reason Google's decided that we shouldn't be on for much longer. We're getting more and more troubles. But thank you very much again for joining us. And, of course, we'll have the links to the articles that we mentioned in the show notes. But where can people find more about your writings?
Well, you can find my geocaching articles at GPS Tracklog, and also there's more. I blog some geocaching stuff at my personal website, which is adrianfaulkner.com.
Very nice. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I realize it's very early, or shall we say late, for you there. So
it's about 3 a.m. at the moment.
Exactly. So I really appreciate you, number one, being awake and coherent, and number two, speaking with us tonight. So thank you very much.
It's always a joy to speak to you guys.
Now, each and every week, all the GeoGearheads are getting used to this. It's time to get in. You need to address it to GeoGearHeads@CacheManiacs.com. Adrian, you can do this as well.
Oh, cool.
And give it the title, Question 145. Include in that email your geocaching.com screen name and your answer to when GLONASS was made fully available to the public. Have that correct answer along with your geocaching.com screen name and the title, Question 145, by October 8th, 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. That's 9 p.m. Eastern, and you'll be entered into a drawing for a prize from coinsandpins.com. That email address again is geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com. And as a little hint, It was several years after selective availability was disabled.
And that's not the only coinsandpins.com prize that you'll be able to win next week. If you're going to join us live, it's episode 145, Randomize 27, which means another live drawing. So make sure to mark your calendars for that live show and join us, and you can win something very cool, like maybe one of those navigation coins. The week after that, we're going to be talking about appropriate cash placements. That's going to be October 16th. The 23rd is 3D Printing 1. Then we have yet another randomized show, so mark your calendars. You want to be there live for that one because we'll have yet another cool live prize. That's October 30th, the day before Halloween.
Ooh,
and then on November 6th, episode 149 is going to be Pocket Queries 1. So you have 5 more shows to get your questions, your comments, all of your feedback to us at GeoGearHeads@CashManiacs.com, or better yet, call them in so we can hear them in your own voice at 206-350-3647. And of course, you can visit GeoGearHeads.com/upcoming to see that entire list and convert the times for your local area.
Be sure to check the Cache Maniacs website at CacheManiacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes from this and all our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing GeoGearHeads@CacheManiacs.com, or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cache Maniac shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron or making a PayPal donation through the link on our website to support the Cache Maniac shows. Thank you, Cache at Night, for your financial support of this episode. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Darrell Wattenberg. This show's copyright 2010 by Darrell Wattenberg, all rights reserved.
Cash with a Cash Maniac.